Good evening. It is certainly good to see everyone here, and glad that you are with us tonight. If you're watching us online, we're certainly glad that you're with us as well. We're going to be continuing our series on these questions that Jesus asked tonight, and the one tonight I think is such a great reminder for us, and one I think sometimes that we fall short of with things that, with remembering just how we are to act and how we are to respond to certain things. It comes from Luke chapter 17, so if you want to turn over there. Jesus asked this question, and I cannot even fathom in my mind that, how a group of people could do what they did to him, or how they responded to him, or didn't respond for that matter, as you'll see in just a few minutes here. But in Luke chapter 17 and verse 17, Jesus asked this question. And again, I'm going to back up after we look at this question to see how they arrived at this question, or how he did. But in verse 17, he asked, "Were there not 10 cleansed? But where are the 9?" This whole thing has to do with a circumstance, or something that had happened that deeply affected a group of 10 individuals. And Jesus looks at this and just, for whatever reason, they were so unappreciative, or it seemed that way, of the Savior and what he did. I don't think anybody, if I was to ask you, if I asked in this way, I guess, do you appreciate the Son of God? There's not a person that would say no. And I think all of us we could give just a list of reasons of why we follow him and why we love him and the things that he has done for us, the situations of which he has pulled us through. There are so many reasons to be thankful to Christ for what he has done for us. There are some times in which we forget to pray. There are some times that we forget to thank him. But in the long run, I think all of us can look at anything that happens in our lives and really appreciate and thank him for what he has gotten us through, and that he has gotten us up to this point. And so it stifles me when I look at situations like this, of which we're going to be reading. If you look back at chapter 17, verse 11, we see what led up to this. Luke records how it happened as he, being Christ, went to Jerusalem, that he passed through the midst of Samaria and Galilee. And then as he entered a certain village, there met him 10 men who were lepers. And I want to pause right there, because we see people with leprosy in the Bible, and I think I think we get it to a certain extent of how severe this really is. But I think at the same time we overlook certain aspects of this disease. This was a horrible, horrible disease. Now, leprosy is something that has been around for years and years. I mean, it affected people back then. It affects people today. In fact, back in 1873, a man named Gerhard Henrik Armhauer Hansen, I know that's a long name to remember, but he came up with what is now called Hansen's disease, and that is the common term for leprosy today. And you may have heard people having this disease, and that is exactly what they would have, as leprosy. And it affects people today the same way that it did back then. But when you look at leprosy in the Bible, and you look at the historical aspects of leprosy in different cultures and different people, they looked at it differently. And because it wasn't just a physical infirmity that they had. This is something that deeply impacted them. It affected their families. It affected the people around them. It affected the different towns of which they would live. And it really had kind of two major impacts on a person. The first one, as you can imagine, is the physical impact that it would make. You did not want to get leprosy. When you look at Leviticus chapter 13, and I'm not going to read the whole thing. In fact, the entire chapter is devoted to this. And if you get a chance, I want to urge you or encourage you to read this chapter, because this talks about what to be done with someone with leprosy, or how they should handle it. And there's a whole bunch of different details in there with this law of how they should treat their clothes, and how they should wash themselves, because essentially when they got leprosy they were deemed unclean. And someone that was unclean had to get out of a state like that. And so it would talk about how they had to cleanse themselves certain ways. They would have to sometimes get rid of their clothing. They would have to wash their clothing, and sometimes done over and over and over until they would not be unclean anymore. And so it was looked at as a great turmoil for those who did catch it, and being looked at as this unclean person. There were laws that did affect a lot of different physical aspects of life and these different diseases. When you look at leprosy, it attacks the nervous system. And if you've ever done your research on the physical part of this, you know how much it has hurt many, many people. But it starts from the nervous system, and then it can spread. It spreads through by skin contact, and it can affect any number of body parts. I mean, it affects the hands, it can affect the feet, it can affect the ears, it can affect the face. And people who have this, if you've ever seen pictures of it, it is really kind of a disgusting disease. But nonetheless, you feel so bad for these people who do get something like this. And when you read about it in the Bible, I can't imagine being at a time where there was no medical attention that was being able to be given. We have come a long way medically. And we know that there are a lot of different things that affect us, and a lot of things that affected people a long time ago that they just could not get a cure for. And we have it now, thankfully, with the technology and the resources that we have. But back then, they did not have that. And so something like this would eventually just kill a person. But it would certainly, before that time, there was so much pain that was involved if they were not, the part of leprosy that hit them was not the dulling of the senses, because a lot of people that would get it would feel, it would hit them so hard and so deeply with their nervous system that they would just not feel any pain at all. That was dangerous. And I've read on several accounts in different settings of how a person back then, I don't want to get too gross with this, but how they would fall asleep, and because they could not feel anything, and they'd have these open wounds, that rats would gnaw at them. And by the morning, you can imagine the kind of state that they're in. And so this was not a disease back then that anyone would have ever wanted, and certainly not want anyone else to have either. People would suffer disfigurement. They'd have disfigured skin. They would have these disfigured bones, twisting of limbs, curling of fingers. In fact, it's very interesting when you start reading some of this, because other places of the Bible describe the very nature of what this disease really is. And that was interesting, reading about the curling of the fingers. If you hold your place there and you turn, you can probably, I'll let you do it. Matthew, Mark, and Luke all record the instance that Christ heals a man with a withered hand. And this is the miracle that he did on the Sabbath, and that's when the Pharisees attacked him and the other Jews attacked him for performing a miracle on the Sabbath, and they thought that he shouldn't have ever done that. Well, that very miracle that he performed that day was someone with a withered hand, and most historians will attribute that to leprosy, that Christ touched him and he healed him and cured this withered hand that he had, or this hook hand that he would have with leprosy. And so they'd have this great physical impact that would come upon them. But it wasn't just a physical impact that would hit them. There was also a social impact. In fact, the social impact was probably just as bad, if not worse, than the physical impact. Because they'd go through pain, they'd go through this disfigurement, they'd know that they did not look pretty, or they didn't look presentable by any means. But it was because of that very situation that led to the social impact of what they would do. There was a stigma that came with leprosy, and there was a stigma in a lot of different cultures. If you look in Luke chapter 17, the latter part of verse 12, where it talks about how Christ, it says Christ he meets these 10 lepers, but at the end of verse 12 it says these 10 men who were lepers stood afar off. Now the reason it says this is because lepers were not accepted into the communities. They had to stay outside of the cities, and then people, family members or friends or whatever, would take them the food, or they'd take them different things that they would need outside of there, and it's because they were not welcome into all of these different towns. They were separated from the people. They were banished from family. They were banished from neighbors. And so any interaction that they had was when someone would visit them. I mean, they were the shut-ins of their day. But their kind of being shut in was just being shut out. And no one wanted anything to do with them, or most people didn't want anything to do with them. And I'm guessing, for part of it was for fear of that it might spread or be contagious to them. And so imagine being the worst possible kind of outcast. That not only do you have to deal with this physical disease that is just literally just eating away at your body, but that no one wants anything to do with you. And to feel so unwanted and so unloved as they did. In fact, I want to just give you a couple of different sources here that just to kind of put this into perspective when we talk about it. The National Library of Medicine had this to say about those with leprosy. It says those that had it were isolated, they were excluded from society, stigmatized, and such a stigma indicates the strong feeling that a leprosy patient is shameful and should not be accepted by society. There was no remorse at all. There was no compassion. People simply saw someone who was suffering in that way and said, we want nothing to do with them. Just stay away from me. And so, I mean, it's just unbelievable to me. You take today, what we've been going through this last year, and someone with COVID, everybody wants to stay away from them, or, you walk into a grocery store, the worst thing you could do is cough because you have all the eyes on you, right? Because people have just been so conditioned, I think, to just say, well, I don't want anything to do with that person. Can you imagine, though, having a disease like this? And not just having a store, just say, okay, well, maybe you shouldn't be here. But having the entire town and relatives and people who once knew you want nothing to do with you anymore. In fact, in India, they have a belief with leprosy that's tied to this whole stigma that they don't think it to be a disease at all, but they believe that it is a curse from the gods. And they believe it to be incurable because the gods have cursed people for whatever reason for being unfaithful to them. And there is still a great stigma in that culture. What a horrible way to live. And so these are the people that Jesus saw when he comes down into the midst of Samaria and Galilee. The ones that no one else wanted. But Jesus wasn't done with them. And he wouldn't turn his back on them the way that so many others did. And when you look at this situation, when you look at verse 13 and forward, you see how there were 10 miracles, really, that were performed that day. Jesus looked at every single one of these individuals, begging for him to take care of them. And look at the compassion that he had. Verse 13, it says, they lifted up their voices, and they said, Jesus, Master. So they must have known who he was, and they must have known what he was capable of doing, and I'm sure either word was spread and got to them, possibly that they saw other miracles that he may have performed, but somehow, some way, they knew that this was the one that they needed to see. This was the one that they needed to talk to, begging for their lives, literally begging him, Jesus, Master, have mercy on us. And so when he saw them, he said to them, okay, go and show yourselves to the priests. And so it was that as they went, they were cleansed. How amazing this must have been to see. He says, I want you to go and I want you to talk to the priests. But as they were leaving, Jesus healed all 10 of them. These men, these 10 people, who knows how long they had it, how bad it was in their personal lives, but these 10 people, the only thing they had in common that we have record of is the disease that they shared. And they were the only ones that would talk to each other. And that day, every one of them were cleansed. When you look at this, it's interesting to realize that their affliction brought them together with this common clause. The only ones that would really accept a leper are other lepers. They would talk to each other. But Jesus said, when they begged him, he said, I want you to go and talk to the priests. And he healed them on their way. There's so many different lessons to learn from up to this point even. First, notice when Jesus, the way he healed them, he didn't just heal them, and he could have done that. But there was a condition that was laid down, wasn't there? We see a lot of these conditions in Scripture. We see a lot of the conditions in which miracles were performed, that Jesus would say, if you do this, and this goes all the way back to the Old Testament where God is telling them, if you do this, then I will bless you. There are conditions that are laid out. And this is what the condition that Jesus said. You go talk to the priests, you're going to be healed. Every one of them went and talked to those priests. Every one of them were healed the way that he said that he would do. And they knew that Christ was the only one, no one else, that could have given them that relief. And how relieved they must have been to go through this for possibly their entire life in this state. And to finally be rid, to have this social weight on them, the physical weight on them, just lifted in one day. To have Jesus tell them, you go and I'm going to heal you, and that's exactly what he did. And to finally feel the relief. To be normal again, or what society would have been called normal. What a day that must have been for these people. And out of all 10 of them, one of them showed gratitude. Just one. You go on, verse 15, it says, then one of them, when he saw that he was healed, returned. And with a loud voice, I imagine probably any of us would have said the same thing with a loud voice. When you're healed and you finally, everything is gone. All the disease is gone from your body. And how excited they must have been. And here's the one who returns, and with a loud voice, he glorified God, fell down on his face at his feet, giving him thanks. And it wasn't just the fact that he gave him thanks. The very next thing that is recorded right here is what should stifle us. And it probably stifled anyone that would have been at that time living and seeing all of this happen. The one who returned was a Samaritan. That should never have happened, because the Jews and the Samaritans hated each other. They despised each other. The Jews saw the Samaritans as these mongrels, these mutts, they were just these crossbreeded. They hated them because of who they mingled with and who they married. And yet it was a Samaritan who came back, knowing that Jesus was a Jew, and they fell at his feet. It's interesting when we read about the Samaritan. Jesus, this is not the first time Jesus recorded something of someone that should never have socially been, interacting with him. We see this account of this good Samaritan, don't we, on the road when, this Jew was downtrodden. He was laying on the ground and everyone was passing by him. And Jesus said, no, the one that stopped and helped him was a Samaritan. And here, the one person who came back and thanked him was a Samaritan. And Jesus answered and said, were there not 10 cleansed? How ungrateful that it would be. I can't imagine just, the Savior, here's the one that would come back. Jesus cured 10 people that day. And the one who should have had nothing to do with the Jews was the one that came back. His own people didn't come back. Where are the 9? Were there not any found who returned to give glory to God except this foreigner. Some translations render this stranger. But that actually should be that word foreigner, because he wasn't even from around there. He wasn't even, he wasn't one of the Jews. And he said to him, "Arise and go your way. Your faith has made you whole." 10 men were cleansed that day, but only one of them was made whole. Think about that. One of them came back, and one of them lifted him up and acknowledged him. They were grateful and gave God the glory to him for it. Friends, I want to encourage you that when anyone does something for you, let them know how thankful you are to them. I can't imagine someone treating the Son of God like this, where they would just run off and be excited and have their life changed that day, and to not even come back and be thankful and show the gratitude that is owed to the one who helped you get there. Don't ever let gratitude be lost. There's a lot of people that do great things here, and that are certainly worthy of our gratitude. And we looked last week at how important it is to volunteer and step up, and that is such an important thing to do as members of the body. But I want you to realize on the flip side of that, we need to thank those people who step up like that. Show your gratitude to them and thank them. I mean, there are so many different things in this building that people do. So many things we probably don't even think of. And we come in and the building is clean and the bathrooms are clean. I heard that there was a lot of response, or several had responded when there was a call to clean something like the bathroom. How grateful it is, and I know the leaders are thankful for that. But we need to be grateful for people that step up and do these different tasks in the congregation and who fill these positions. Thank them and show them. Let them know how much they are appreciated. All of the ones behind the scenes. Let those Bible teachers that are teaching our children, let them know how much you really do appreciate them, because those lessons are not spontaneous lessons. They don't just come in and shoot from the hip when they teach these young kids. They prepare, and many of them prepare for hours during that week to give these children 30 or 40 minutes. Thank the ones who clean. Thank the ones who do this building maintenance. Thank those who are involved with being able to even broadcast out to beyond these walls. I know I've seen Stacy at this building hours on end. When he's not outside working on the yard outside, he's in here working on stuff. And I know there's so many other people that work just tirelessly. We need to be grateful and show gratitude to those who step up and do this work. And that's what we owe Christ, don't we? You think about this. When we have things that we get through and things that make our life a little bit easier or uncomplicated, what would any of us be if we had to rely on ourselves alone? Never fail showing God gratitude and the recognition that he deserves. I think all of us have gone through a lot this last year, and he got us through it. He got us to this point, and he's going to keep being there for us. When's the last time you thanked him and just poured your heart out to him, thanking him for getting him to this point? Something else makes us unclean. Only this separates us from God, and that's sin. And how grateful we can be knowing that Christ went to that cross for us to take care of it. We see that, we have this memorial every Sunday morning. It's going to be offered tonight. And you think that he went to the cross that day for us. When's the last time that you thanked him? We have a chance to go to heaven and be spiritually cleansed because of him. And if you haven't been spiritually cleansed, you have a chance to do that tonight. If you need to ask forgiveness for anything, he's the one that can offer it. Make sure that you take your issues to him, beg him for that forgiveness, and thank him that that forgiveness is even being able to be offered to us. What an amazing God that we serve. Let's stand and sing.